Man, I totally lost my train of thought. Golly, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, bad stuff happening. What's the...
Controversy or?
Yes, controversy, and what's a more formal way of saying that? Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. We're so glad you're here. Happy Friday, everyone. Well, that's the day we're recording it. Happy whatever day it is that you're listening to this. My name is Andy Moore, and I'm one of your hosts, joined as I am every week by two other lovely folks. Bailey Perkins, hello.
Hello, Andy.
And Dr. Scott Melson, hello, sir.
What's up, dude?
What's up? This has been quite the week in politics, both in Oklahoma, at the hyper-local level, right? City, county, state, and national level. I want to begin by acknowledging that this week was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the ratification of that amendment, which, of course, was women's suffrage, giving women the right to vote. It is also worth acknowledging that that did not give all women the right to vote because, of course, African Americans were barred from voting for several more decades, as well as several other classes of people who can now vote. And so I want to highlight that. Also, this week, I think the next day, that was on Tuesday, and then I believe on Wednesday was the 62nd anniversary of the Clara Lupa, I can't talk today, was the 62nd anniversary of the Clara Luper sit-ins, which, of course, was part of the civil rights movement here in Oklahoma City.
Well, it started the sit-in movement across the country.
Right.
And so it was the first sit-ins that happened, and it inspired what happened at the Woolworth lunch counter about a year later in North Carolina. And so it was really a pivotal time in activating people within the civil rights movement for that form of civil and nonviolent protests.
That's right. The sit-ins in Oklahoma City started earlier and lasted longer than they did anywhere else.
And it led to the desegregation of the Katz drugstore lunch counters, not just in Oklahoma, but within that region. And so Clara Luper utilized 13 young people. So that's another element that made it significant. You had folks as young as, I believe, 6-7 years old, participating from the Oklahoma City NAACP Youth Council. And then you had several others over time who participate in that sit-in. We had the pleasure with a project I've been working with, Black Women Voices, to interview a few women who participated in that sit-in. One was an original sit-inner and the daughter of Clara Luper, Marilyn Luper Hildreth, and a couple of others were sit-inners who were also, one of them talked about the experience of being arrested during that sit-in movement. But I mean, their work and their bravery, led to people like me being able to be in spaces that I couldn't have been decades ago. So I'm certainly grateful to hear from their living history and how far we're continuing to move. And then on Wednesday, I had the chance to join Congresswoman Horn on her podcast talking about the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the significance of the centennial, and how far we have to go even then. So it really is a week of a lot of history.
Yeah.
It's been special.
I didn't know that our Congresswoman has a podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, Congresswoman Horn has a podcast?
Did I say podcast?
You did.
My bad.
Not a podcast?
That was a misspeak. It was a town hall.
Oh,
there
right.
we go.
It was still
a virtual town hall that she does weekly on her Facebook page.
Oh, right.
And I believe she does it through Zoom, but it shows live through Facebook. And so each week she has a different topic that matters to the constituents within Congressional District 5. And so for this week, she focused on the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And so she invited myself, to speak on behalf of the Oklahoma Women's Coalition because I serve as vice chair of that organization's board. She invited Sarah Brown, who is a commissioner for the Oklahoma Commission for the Status of Women, and also works for the Second Fox Nation, to talk from the lens of Oklahoma women and the role that they played even before the ratification of that amendment, and how forward Oklahoma was with allowing women to participate in areas of public service and voting. And then tribes, in that lens of how women from tribal communities were participating in elections well even before the fight for suffrage. And so that was a really neat element. And of course, having the voice of Marilyn Looper Hildreth talking about where we have to go and sharing her wisdom from being one of the original sit-inners and being the daughter of Claire Looper. So
Yeah, it's outstanding. Yeah, I mean, I guess in this day and age where we're all working remotely and streaming meetings and town halls, basically we all have a podcast, right?
Everything is a
it
podcast.
feels like it. Yeah.
The system, so we use, as I think our listeners know, we use StreamYard right now for our recording to do it. There's other options. Crowdcast is a great option, or Squadcast is a great option, and we may go back to that. But I use the same platform for all kinds of things, and you can use Zoom for all of that.
I was on a board meeting last night, and it was Zoom, and we're chatting before we kind of gavelled in and got started. Somebody's like, "Melson, what is your? This is a fancy Zoom setup you have going on." And they're like, is this what you just use for all of your meetings?" And I was like, "Well, it is. That's not why I have it." But they're like, you definitely have the highest sound quality of any of the participants in our meeting." And I was like, "Well, I hope so."
Right. That's all. When all you have to go on is sound and video, it makes sense to put our resources there. Not my wardrobe.
Yeah.
I'm wearing like a running shirt and shorts because I'm willing myself to go for a run after this. Scott is wearing a Let's Fix This t-shirt, which is very on brand. Well done.
Well, hopefully this won't get us too off track, but it's interesting that we went from everything being Skype and that being almost a verb to now Zoom being like the verb of all of the video conferencing type of platforms. So,
oh man, that's Bailey. You hit the nail on the head. I haven't even thought about that, but Skype was like a ubiquitous term, as many good brands are, right? Kleenex, Uber, Google, all these things.
right.
But I haven't heard the name Skype in months. Well, I guess it got bought by Microsoft, and they've got Microsoft Teams that they're really promoting now. But yeah, how quickly they may fall.
Right.
All right. Well, speaking of virtual formats and doing everything virtually, we're going to start off by talking a little bit about the Democratic National Convention, which happened this week. Then we're going to talk about Oklahoma County stuff. Man, that's been a mess. The Board of County Commissioners and the jail trust and all that jazz. Then we'll talk about Congressional District 5, the runoff between Terry Neese and Stephanie Bice.
We're 4 days away from that.
That's right. Oh, yeah. And let's start there, Bailey. As a reminder, listeners, we are recording this on the 21st. So in just 4 days, the 25th is the next election. It is a runoff election for a lot of state races. However, it is also like a municipal election in a lot of cities. There's lots of stuff that may be on the ballot, regardless of what your party is, right? And so if you're not sure...
That's why you need to check.
That's right.
elections.ok.gov.
That's right. You should definitely go to elections.ok.gov and log in to the online voter tool, and you can view your ballot, and it'll tell you if you have one or not, because you don't want to miss an election, anytime, but particularly this year. And because there's so many little things. In fact, I just saw earlier that Oklahoma City, I think just this week, has approved, maybe it was last week, that Oklahoma City has recently approved a number of changes to the city's charter, which is like the constitution for the city. And those changes will be on the ballot in November. So here we are, just, not even less than 100 days from the election, and super important things are still being added to the ballot. And so this is why you've got to pay attention. If you haven't already registered to vote absentee for November, there's still time. There's not time to register for the August runoff, but for November there is. And just as a word, we'll talk a lot more about this between now and then, but just because you receive an absentee ballot doesn't mean you have to vote absentee. You can still vote in person if you would like. But it gives you the option that way, right? To be flexible there. Also, it serves as a great reminder that there's an election coming up because you get the ballot in the mail, and it gives you time to read through all the items on the ballot. And so there's a lot of benefits to registering to vote absentee, even if you don't actually vote that way.
And Andy, thank you for bringing that up. That's an important point that people have to keep in mind this election cycle. We focus a lot on the race for president and vice president of the United States at the federal level, but there's going to be state questions on that November ballot. There's going to be municipal matters that you just described on that ballot. And so regardless of how you feel about the 2020 presidential race, you need to show up to vote on the things that are going to affect you right here in your backyard, because those things are also going to be on your ballot. So.
That's right. All politics is local.
One thing that I do think we should mention, since we're on the subject, is there's a lot of stuff going on with the post office right now. Like, some of it could be shenanigans, some of it may be stuff that's been coming for a long time. But like, regardless of where it's coming from, what seems to be clear is this: if you are going to vote by mail, and I want to emphasize you should, unless you feel comfortable wearing a mask and social distancing and trying to vote in person, you need to request your ballot like now, right? Like,
don't wait until the deadline.
Yeah, go online now and just say, I want my absentee ballots for the rest of the year for any election. They'll send them to you. They send them to you like weeks and weeks in advance. You can fill it out. You can turn it back in weeks and weeks in advance. Do not wait until the last minute to request or turn in your absentee ballot. The deadline is a week before. If you wait until a week before, you will not get your ballot in time. And if you get it, if you get it far enough in advance of the election, but you wait and like turn it in, like try to send it in like 2 days before the election, there's a real chance your ballot won't be counted, because in Oklahoma, it is not that it has to be postmarked by the date of the election. The election board has to have it by 7 p.m. the night of the election. If it comes after that, then it won't be counted. So you need to request your ballot and turn your ballot in as soon as possible in order to ensure that your vote is counted.
That's right. And you can turn them in person if you'd like.
Yes, you can.
You don't have to mail them.
Only you, though.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Your
This
friends. It has
is
to only
really,
be you.
really important.
Yeah.
You cannot go around to your friends and get their ballots and take them all and drop them off together at the election board. That is not legal to do in Oklahoma. It's called something. There's a name for it.
Ballot harvesting.
Yeah, called ballot harvesting, which is not legal in Oklahoma. So you have to turn it in. Okay.
And I
go
appreciate
ahead,
you
Bailey.
giving space for this, Andy, because it is important for our listeners to pay attention to. I was a poll worker for the previous election, so that primary election in June, and we had several people who came up to the polling place and they had an envelope in their hand that said, "Hey, I have this ballot. What can I do with it? Because I got it so late." And if you get an absentee ballot, you still can vote in person. But there were so many people who received their ballots too late to mail it in. And then I saw on David Glover's Facebook page some data from the Oklahoma County Election Board that said that there were about 4.6% of ballots that were mailed in that were rejected. Mm-hmm. So we're talking 34,000 ballots that were returned in Oklahoma County for a number of reasons. And so that's pretty significant. And it's because we've had a record number of people voting by mail. And so there's a whole lot that a lot of Oklahomans are learning in this process. But please, 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 as Scott mentioned, do not wait until that deadline. Take some time now in the month of September to make sure that you have your absentee ballot with you so that you have ample time to fill it out and get it in, because you can check on the state election board's website when you go to that voter profile, and you'll see when your ballot has been submitted and received by the election board.
Yeah.
So don't wait till the last minute.
And hopefully we've talked about this enough on the show over the years that this won't be a surprise to anyone's listening. But for the love of all that is good and pure, please, please, please vote, right? Please vote. Do y'all know, I heard an incredible stat this week. The presidential election in 2016 in Wisconsin, President Trump won Wisconsin by like something like, I want to say like 70, 80,000 votes. Like it was not like very much. It was a very slim margin. Might have been less than that. It might have been like 20,000. But it came down to about 2 votes per precinct.
Yeah.
2 votes per precinct across the state would change the outcome of a presidential election in an environment similar to 2016. So I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I'm telling you to please vote.
Yeah. Well, and I will admit on the podcast, I've not said this publicly, but my ballot in June was one of those that was rejected in Oklahoma County. And I have a weird sense of shame about that. So I got a letter on July 31st, so a month after the election, that said, sorry, your ballot was rejected due to reason. And the reason cited was that the affidavit, like the envelope, was not signed. And so I didn't notarize it. I submitted a copy of my voter ID card. In fact, I requested an extra copy of my voter ID card from the county election board and sent that in with it. So they knew they sent me the ballot. They knew they received my ballot. They knew I attached my ID to it. And allegedly I didn't sign the envelope. Now, I'm not entirely certain about that because my wife voted absentee and we did it at the same time. And I even made a video about it using my ballot. And so I went back to look at that. And I didn't do every single step on video. And now I wish I had.
It's a complicated process for Oklahoma.
Well, it's complicated, but I feel like as someone who is, I don't know, highly engaged in this process and has been fighting for absentee voter reform in Oklahoma to make it easier, the fact that mine wasn't counted, like, was a bit of a gut punch. And as I told a few people, everyone was like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." Like even my wife was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and so. I realized this isn't a game, right? Like voting is not a game. You're not like, oh, whoops, I'll try again next time, which I will. But when things are close, right? In Oklahoma, Medicaid expansion was really close, way closer than I think the Yes on 802 campaign thought it was going to be. Yeah. And so when it comes down to elections and presidents and your representation, people that are going to be in office for years or that are going to be a change for years to come, it's important to make sure your vote gets counted. Now, I do not share that to dissuade anyone from voting absentee. I share that because it's real and it happened, and that you've got to be diligent. Yeah. Read the instructions, take time, make sure you did it right. If you have any uncertainty, ask, about it, and double check your work.
County election board. That's what they're there for.
That's right.
You can call and ask those questions because you don't want to be in that position of not being able to vote. That's hard, especially when you care and you want your vote to count. So take your time, do it early.
So I'm talking to some folks to find out, I would like to view my envelope. I don't know if they retain them long enough that you can do that because they don't tell you until a month later. And so I was like, I really would like to see it with my own eyes if I didn't sign it. That seems unlikely, but
I don't know if they throw away envelopes.
Right, I don't know either.
If it was rejected, they should keep it, I feel like, so to verify so you can track it. But one other thing I'll say, the last plug, is if you do vote absentee, you can track your ballot status on the state election board website. So you can track it's been mailed out, it's been received. It's really pretty cool. So if you want to know exactly where your ballot is in the process, that information is available to you. So everybody, let's crash the election board website this week because everybody's getting on requesting their absentee ballots.
Don't freak them out, Scott. Just listeners, the website is secure. Don't worry about that.
We have the most secure elections in the country. Don't be scared about.
I'm not saying hack it. I'm saying there's traffic. Let's have 100,000 people request absentee ballots. That's all I'm saying.
There was a record number that requested them in the last election. It was 323,000 or something. It was a lot. Anyway, on that note, let's move ahead to the actual thing. We said we're going to talk about this now, and then we talked about the election instead. And that thing is, this week was the Democratic National Convention. We officially have a Democratic candidate for president, Joe Biden, and his running mate, Kamala Harris.
My sorority sister.
Was she really?
Throw that out there.
You guys, same sorority?
In fact, she made a shout out during her speech to Historically Black Colleges University, because she's a graduate of Howard University.
Yeah.
And then she said family is Alpha Kappa Alpha, which is the organization that I'm a member of. And so that made a lot of us feel special.
That's cool. Well, and the Greek life is not a world that I'm familiar with, but from what I understand, particularly like at historically black colleges, like it has, like those roots run deep and those ties are strong, and it's
lifetime membership. So we are involved from the time that you're initiated, whether that's in a undergraduate setting or in a graduate chapter, through the rest of your life when you're considered what we call an Ivy beyond the wall after you pass away. And so you're a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha for life. So we're
That's
all
cool.
Proud to see that history happen.
Yeah. So the Democratic National Convention was, of course, not held in person. It was streamed live, which is a very different format for something. So they, any convention has to do the pomp and circumstance of speeches. It also has to do the official party business. And as a reminder, because I think
the roll call for states that everybody loves.
And I think it's important to remember that political parties are basically private clubs, right? They're private organizations that have their own rules. I mean, they have to follow the law, but within that, they have their own rules for how they do things. The two parties do a lot of things the same, but they do some things differently. And how they go about choosing their representation or their candidates is a private process, right? And so it is, I think conventions are an interesting look in, behind the veil to inside to see how these private groups do their thing. As someone who is not a member of either party at this time, like it seems weird that there are private clubs on the national stage that millions of people are watching pick their person. And
oftentimes we run into situations where the candidate it's known who that candidate is going to be before the convention happens. And so this is one of those years. I went to a convention back in 2012, which is a really interesting experience because in normal circumstances, whatever city is picked, and it typically has to be one of those like top 10 to 15 largest cities in the country because it has to be able to fit, probably like 100,000 people from all over the country who attend, whether it's the Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention. And I mean, it's a good time as far as so many vendors being there, from the different speakers who are brought in to participate, all the way through like the pomp and circumstances that we saw of each state doing their roll call. Each state has, a number of delegates that are selected to cast their votes for certain candidates. And so this is one of those years where it was more formality than selecting a candidate. And that's going to be the same thing when the RNC happens in a few weeks, because the sitting president is the incumbent, and it's rare to see the party in power pick somebody outside of being the incumbent. And so it's an interesting time for people to have seen that process, but also in a new way of like not having all of those folk together in one venue or in collective spaces, and just being able to watch it through a Zoom where the entire country, regardless of what party you're a part of, got to be a part of this experience. So that's a unique thing.
Did you guys watch it, or watch any of it, or most of it, or some of it? What'd you guys?
I watched pieces.
Yeah, I watched Michelle Obama's piece, and that was it.
I watched every minute of it, all 4 days. And I got to tell you, because obviously, like, I'm here doing this, talking about it with y'all. I'm a political junkie nerd person, and so I love this stuff. So I watch them. I tweeted last night that I watch the conventions every year, and then I was like, hey, Nelson, there's not a convention every year. But, like, every time they happen, like, every 4 years, I watch the conventions. And I got to say, I have like a memory of watching every convention since 2004, and I remember 2004 because that's when President Obama spoke on the national stage for the first time, and it was incredible. I like this one the best, like by far. Like it's not even close. Like, because usually what happens is like, you have like they basically give like every elected person who wants 2 minutes to get up in front of the convention and say something they do, and there's a lot of like punditry and a lot of going back and forth to like what the CNN hosts are saying to each other and what the MSNBC hosts are saying to each other, and then like there'll be a video and they'll cut to commercial, and so you really don't like see a lot of the goings on, right? Like even in the primetime programming, a lot of it is like critiquing by cable TV hosts and then the main speech at the end of the night. But this, because there wasn't that, we got to see a lot of this stuff. Like we got to see, I mean, like last night, they had an absolutely incredible video that was a tribute to the late Congressman John Lewis, that will bring you to tears. I mean, it was incredible.
Well, and there was a beautiful tribute to former Senator John McCain and his relationship with Vice President Biden, and so that was really special too to see those dynamics.
I mean, there was so much. There was a video with a young man. I don't know his last name, but he's 13. His name is Braden, who Vice President Biden met on the campaign trail in New Hampshire, and he went to Braden's class. He was meeting some of the kids, and he said, Braden, you know something? You and I have something in common. We're both members of the same club. And Braden said, what's that? And he says, we both stutter. And he talked to this kiddo about the things he did as a child to overcome his stutter. And Braden gave a speech last night as part of a series of speeches introducing the vice president before he accepted the nomination, talking about his stutter and that experience of meeting the vice president. And if you didn't like have tears in your eyes watching that, then you don't have a human heart. It's like, it was, I mean, just there's been like so much of the convention this week because it wasn't people all in one and under one roof, and because there wasn't as much kind of pomp and circumstance. I would say that aside from like, Michelle Obama, President Obama, Vice President Biden, and Senator Harris, other than the four of them as kind of the keynote speakers each night, the main, like the star of this convention was like the American people. Like it was regular people from all over the country talking about the way the pandemic has affected them, what they want to see from government, what they want to see from our politics, the vision that they have of the country moving forward. Now, of course, all of this was like in the context of electing Joe Biden president. Let's not kid ourselves. Like there was a unifying message here, but man, it was awesome. Like it was awesome.
Like, and I won't say a critique, but more so of like one of the positive aspects that was lifted about the convention this year was the diversity of voices that were given this platform to be able to talk about a shared vision. And so one of the things that's been constantly talked about, even with the state roll call introductions, you had people from an assortment of racial backgrounds and disabilities, and you have people from rural parts of the country and urban parts of the country. You had just so many different pieces to the fabric of what makes America what it is. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the RNC next week, if they have that level of attention to who they're including and giving the microphone to and having that space to speak.
Yeah, I just dropped an article in the chat for you guys to read, and I'll post it in the show notes. But it's an article from the BBC, of course, the British broadcasting company, about the Republican National Convention next week and what to expect. And the first question is, what is the RNC or the convention? And I just like the outside perspective of someone from another country reporting on our convention process and what to expect out of this. I'm going to go I'm sure they wrote one about the DNC as well. I'm going to go find that one and read it. It was very interesting. I think the virtual format definitely has its pros and cons, and it will be super interesting to see how the two parties contrast in their approach to this. I believe the RNC will have some in-person components still, and so we'll wait and find. I'm sure I'll watch some of it next week. I will say,
and I wonder too, will there even be as many Democratic speakers as there were Republican speakers at this DNC?
That's what I was going to say.
John Kasich, you had Colin Powell, you had just so many powerful, reputable, moderate Republican voices at this convention.
Yeah, it was as many things in 2020. It was unprecedented in several ways. All right, well, let's zoom way down from the national level down to the county level. Oklahoma County Board of County Commissioners has made the news, I feel like, almost every day or every other day for the last couple of weeks. A quick recap is they had $35 million in CARES Act money that they received, federal money to use in their county for coronavirus related.
They received $47 million.
Yeah, that's right. So they received $47 million, but they were going to made a decision about 35 or 34 million of that. And the budget board, which consists of the 3 county commissioners and some other people, voted 5-3 to send that money to the Oklahoma County Jail Trust, basically give that money to the jail. And then protests started, right? People were showing up, trying to do public comment when it was made available. And because
it wasn't at first. That
Right.
was due to the public pressure because of the critique that you ran this through and you didn't allow for the public to weigh in on how those dollars were spent. But Andy, before you go into more of that explanation, I want to give a little bit of more pre-context as to why the decision was made to spend it on just county level needs. The district attorney is considered the attorney for the Oklahoma County. And the interpretation for how the funds could be used is dependent upon the attorney general, not the attorney general, but the district attorney's interpretation. Because one of the things that could happen is if they decide to not go with the attorney, I keep wanting to call him attorney general, the district attorney's opinion, they could be, charged for whatever if it's deemed illegal what they're doing. So one of the interpretations that the DA had with the CARES Act funds for the county was state statute doesn't allow for CARES Act dollars to be spent on things that are outside of the purview of Oklahoma County. So that's how he interpreted how those funds could be spent. So they already started with a limited scope of what you could do with those funds. And then with that, you had the proposal from Commissioner Calvi that said, well, since we can only spend it on things relevant to the county, let's put it all in the jail trust.
Right. Well, it came from the court clerk or the county clerk first, Rick Warren, and then he ended up not running it. So then Calvi picked it up, of course, and they put it on the agenda anyway. And then at the meeting, he's like, yeah, it's mine.
Because other counties and municipalities did not spend their money in this way. This is very unprecedented because even Tulsa County received over $100 million of CARES Act funds, and they created programs that allow different community organizations and businesses and wherever there's need to apply for funds to be able to tap into those CARES Act funds. So
right, which is what a lot of organizations and businesses in Oklahoma County anticipated would happen. Yes. And then when the rug got pulled out from underneath those plans, they were, I'm sure many of them were counting on the fact that they would be able to apply for this large pot of money.
Because that was the plan. That was the intent, right? The intent was not for this to go to the jail. And it's not even clear it's legal for it to go to the jail, right? So one of the things that they've said that they're going to spend this on is paying salaries and bonuses back to March. Well, by law, you can't use CARES Act funding for expenses that have already been budgeted. So you can't use it for that, right? And then if they can't spend all of this
by December,
if you can't spend all this by December, then we have to give the money back.
Right.
And by the way, Commissioner Calvi, whose grand idea this was to give all the money to the jail trust, Commissioner Calvi happens to also sit on the jail trust.
So that's
Is he the only? Sorry,
Yes, he's the only commissioner on the jail trust. Yeah.
Well, because the commissioners have to vote on who would represent the commissioners on that trust, and Calvi was elected
Right.
2-1 to be on that trust.
Because he voted for himself and Mon voted for him, right?
Wasn't the trust his idea also in the first place? Back when they
I
started
think he was definitely involved in that process.
Yeah.
So
Calvi.
there's just a lot of questions, but I will say Commissioner Bloomer had been there on the front lines since the beginning, fighting for transparency in the process, but also thinking through and allowing public opinion to weigh in how those funds should be delegated and spent. So
Yeah. So what happened this week with that is that it came down to the budget board. So, okay, first of all of these boards are like largely the same people, or there's overlap with them.
the budget board is just all of the county elected officials.
All 8 or 9 of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those people voted to send the money to the jail trust, but then it had to go. So it's basically a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to do that. And then the county commissioners have to actually approve it.
Right.
As a reminder, there's 3 county commissioners. And so the meeting was set to start.
At 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Commissioners Calvi and Mon were seated. Commissioner Bloomert was in the hallway talking to some constituents and was coming in. And
At 9:01.
At 9:01, Commissioner Calvi said, "Meeting's in. Here's the vote. We vote. Boom. Meeting's over." And closed it. It was like a 45-second meeting before Commissioner Bloomert even had a chance to sit in her chair. And so 2 votes
Andy,
to do it. And then I guess it was 2-0. And he was like, I don't know if it's 2-1 or 2-0, but it passes.
Well, and Commissioner Bloomer did an interview, I believe is with KOCO, I believe, but with one of the news stations. And she said that typically the protocol is that all the commissioners wait for the other commissioners, and they start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and they start with, I don't know if it's prayer or there's something else. It's like Pledge of Allegiance is something else and a formality, and then they begin the meeting. So typically it's 9:05, 9:10 before they get into the business. And because
And also,
how much public attention's been getting onto this, the vote was rushed right in a way that's unprecedented for these 3 commissioners.
yeah, and this vote, like this was agenda item 22 on their agenda.
Right.
And Commissioner Calvi said, we're going to skip ahead to item 22, called the vote, they voted, and then dismissed the meeting.
And didn't
And the commissioners
address
said
the
that
other
they
issues.
Yeah.
they normally allow commissioners to ask questions, to get information. And so Commissioner Bloomer said her chief was in that meeting and they weren't allowing him to even ask questions on the commissioner's behalf. So there were a lot of intentional efforts to rush this vote without deliberation.
Yeah, and so it was clear this was the plan from the get-go, right? And which begs the question, does that mean that Calvi and Mon had planned this out ahead of time? If so, that's illegal for 2 county commissioners to be meeting because that's a quorum. And so I know some people are looking into that. And secondly, like, even if they didn't, like, let's say they somehow had not already planned this out. They got there, Calvi did it, Mon, of course, is on board with it, and they pushed it through. It's a bad look. Like, it's a bad look, and I think for most people, I think it degrades the public's trust in them and the institution of our county government, which is county level government in Oklahoma is not unblemished by controversy and scandal.
And corruption.
And corruption. Like, there's a long history in that. And this is the kind of thing that feeds that narrative and perpetuates that same scandal, right? And controversy. So,
especially when you have engaged residents who want to be a part of this process, who are asking questions, and they're being intentionally shut out. There's another element to even this story of a Black reporter for the Black Wall Street Times.
Yeah, just the Black Times.
The Black Times, okay. that wanted to be a part of the press conference and hearing, what Calvi's perspective is on the vote that happened and things that were going on. And that particular reporter was pushed out of the meeting. And the reason they said was because that particular reporter did not have press credentials. However, from the other reporters that were also there, they were echoing on Twitter saying, hey, I don't see how this is true because we weren't asked for our credentials. We weren't asked to show anything. And
they're not required.
And
Well,
they're
it's
not
not
required.
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's
So
not
that
like
feeds
back in the
into
day,
the-
right?
it feeds into the very thing that you were talking about, Andy.
Yeah.
Well, then right before he had excluded Ty, who's the reporter from the meeting, he shoved Chad Whitehead out through the door, like shoved him through the door.
I don't know if he shoved, but he touched him and pushed him a little bit or held him there. But
Okay, shoved
regardless, the idea that a county official laid hands on another person to keep them out of a press conference with
And
the
it was
media
recorded. Like there's video
Right.
footage of that very thing taking
Yeah.
place. So it looks bad all the way around. And
Right.
And
Like-
Commissioner Calvi's response to this is to say that he will not be bullied and he's not going to pay hush money to bullies. That's a quote, especially using taxpayer dollars.
push money to bullies.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and so today, right when we
Commissioner Calvi
started
is an awesome guy.
when we started recording, the top story on the Oklahoman's website is that Commissioner Calvi has a challenger for his next election, which isn't for 2 years; it's in 2022. But Khaki Porch, who's a local filmmaker, an actress, and as a friend of the pod, she's been on the podcast a couple of times, and so she is planning to. She's announced that she's running against him in 2022. Largely because of his antics over the last few weeks. And so I suspect she will not be the only person that challenges his seat. But that was when I pulled up the Oklahoman to prepare for the podcast and saw her face, I was like, whoa, okay, this has escalated. I do want to add one tiny clarification, and I think we'll have a guest on in a future episode to talk more about this, but I've gotten a lot of questions regarding the disallowing of public comment during these meetings, and isn't that a violation of the law? Basically, is the question. And this is me wearing my Freedom of Information Oklahoma hat. Technically, the short answer is it's not against the law. The Open Meetings Act does not require that public bodies have public comment. What we've seen with the shift to virtual meetings from in-person meetings is that public bodies, like let's say a city council that used to offer public comment and now is not, that change by changing formats is questionably legal at best, but certainly frowned upon. But the idea that a public body has to offer public comment is not technically required by the law. Now, as a matter of principle, and I
And
think
good
of
practice.
the spirit of the law, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I get it. I've tried to run public forums before, or I've done it. It is difficult. It is arduous. Sometimes you get folks that disagree with you and they want to say their piece. And part of this exercise in democracy is listening to people that disagree with you and letting them have their space. And I don't know, being willing to receive that information. So
And Andy, that's one thing I miss about even my time working in Arkansas. I worked for a advocacy organization for a couple of years there, and their legislature allows for public testimony and comment on legislation in their committee process. And that was a great opportunity to hear multiple perspectives on issues to ensure that there's no blinders on how policies are being crafted, that different perspectives are being considered, but most importantly, that those perspectives are on public record, right? And Oklahoma should definitely consider having those protocols in place, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, especially for moments like this, because if there was like genuine opportunity for public input, I believe the jail trust had a moment of public comment, but that was due to the rising pressure and frustration from the public. A lot of this could have been averted if public input was allowed.
Right. Yeah. They to their credit, the jail trust held a listening session basically where it was only public comment. They weren't voting on anything. They were only there to listen. And I was like, hey, we should all do more of this. This is a good thing, right? Like listen first, then act. Okay, so we're getting short on time. We haven't talked about COVID yet this week because we're all sick of thinking about COVID, I think. But there was some significant information that came out this week. As I think most listeners know, Dr. Deborah Birx, who's on the White House task force, came to Oklahoma and a few other states and held a meeting that was not open to the public, a round table with the governor, mayors. They did not allow city county health department officials to come. They only allowed state health department officials to come. Joy Hoffmeister from the Department of Education was there. And the reports out of that meeting varied widely from the governor to Hoffmeister and others. And the governor said that Dr. Birx said, it's all good, no recommendations, Oklahoma's fine. However, we have since learned that the White House task force has still been producing information, and while they're not releasing these to the public like they once were, the Center for Public Integrity has been, and
because they've been getting leaked, right? Like someone is leaking them to Center for Public Integrity, who is now publishing them all over the country and providing them to journalists in the affected localities.
Yeah. So Oklahoma's list contains 11 bullet points of things we should do, including a statewide mask mandate, closing bars, no gatherings larger than 10. And
Dr. Melson is so surprised.
I can't believe this. I'm shocked. I say, to find out that there are recommendations for what we could be doing to better control our outbreak. I don't know where that could have come from.
And Andy, is really fascinating because the meeting was closed off when Dr. Birx came to the public and media. And so there were select statewide lawmakers and elected officials, and some local elected officials as well, who were invited to that meeting. And so the governor released pictures from the meeting and said, yep, we had a great meeting, and they applauded Oklahoma for the efforts we were taking. And then you also had tweets from Superintendent Hoffmeister that said they had conversations about things Oklahoma should be doing. And so it's really fascinating to see the difference between what was being reported to us by Governor Stitt and then the recommendations that we're hearing from this list that the Center for Public Integrity has been reporting.
Yeah. And it's really, this has been kind of a drip all week of more and more information. So we're looking at these documents, Center for Public Integrity, and I think actually it may be State Impact, has been sending these around to mayors and commissioners of counties and municipalities around Oklahoma, showing them like this is what would be recommended for your city based on your number of cases. And apparently this is reporting from Catherine Sweeney on Twitter, but the Guymon city manager from Guymon, Oklahoma was like, what the hell? Why have they not been telling us this? We haven't heard this at all. Mayor Holt has said that they haven't gotten this information. Mayor Bynum has said they haven't gotten this information. And I'm sorry, it's not State Impact. It's Public Radio Tulsa. Radio Tulsa that's been doing this. But it certainly seems like there are specific and directed recommendations coming from the federal government to our state leaders, and our state leaders are both not following those and also not sharing those with the public or leadership around the state, which is both of which is a problem.
Brianna Bailey from
Frontier.
The Frontier, thank you so much. My brain is just going numb today. Made that very comment on Twitter of why isn't this information being shared with the public? Why isn't this getting out? Because it is important, especially if we are truly interested in slowing the spread, reducing our COVID cases, and making sure, fewer Oklahomans have to go through, our hospital systems. And so it's interesting that there's so much attention towards controlling the message to where it could be detrimental to the health and well-being of Oklahomans.
Yep. Well, and we'll end. There's another 349 cases today. The trend continues. It
349. It was over 1,000 today, wasn't it?
Did they not update the website? Oh, sorry. I was looking at how many active cases.
I was like, I think it was like 1,000 new cases today, bro.
Let me back up. So, there was another 1,000 new cases today. We are officially over 50,000 cases in Oklahoma now. 715 deaths in total. The pandemic continues. While it looks like the 7-day average, it kind of reached a big peak in late July, early August, and it's gone down somewhat. The last few days, it has certainly ticked back up, and school is starting. So, not ideal. Please wear a mask, socially distance when you can, stop going to bars. I hate it. Like, I would love to go to a bar. You have no idea how much I want to go out and have someone else make me a drink. I'd love to see Bailey and Scott in person sometime again. That would be lovely as well. Talk to one another without like this gnawing anxiety about what is happening, which is what I feel when I go into like the grocery store or something now. On that note, let's end this episode. Thanks, Bailey, for being here.
Always. Thank you, Andy.
Scott, thank you.
Wouldn't miss it.
Don't forget to subscribe and rate Let's Pod This on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're now on Amazon as well, so you can listen from your smart device. Just tell them to play Let's Pod This, and they should play it, which is a fancy party trick for someday when we get to have parties again. You can follow us on social media at Let's Fix This Okay. Scott is at SC Melson. Bailey is at Bailey M. Perkins. And I, Andy, am at AndyOKC. Like in our Facebook page, facebook.com/Let's Fix This Okay. Go to our website, letsfixthisok.org, for all the news you can use, details about upcoming events, even virtual ones, such as the Election Night Show, which we are still planning to have virtually on November 3rd. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We strive to educate and equip everyday Oklahomans with tools and resources to engage with their government in meaningful ways. We encourage you to get involved any way you can. And remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.